bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The legacy of the Macon, however, lives on, as its watery grave serves as an important archaeological site for research, exploration, and mapping. Our speakers today are both researchers with the Naval History and Heritage Command Office of Underwater Archaeology here at the Navy Yard. They're going to talk about the Macon and also UA's efforts in the mapping and recovery of a structural piece from the airship and the process of studying it over time. And you can see here on the table the structural fragment on display. This program is being presented in conjunction with the museum's exhibition, NOAA's Ark, NOAA being the acronym for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Please check out the exhibition if you haven't seen it already after today's program. With that, please welcome from the Office of Underwater Archaeology, Shanna Daniel and Kate Moran.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you coming out, especially with some of the weather that we're having today. So, can you all hear me okay? I'll bring it down just a little bit. There we go. Yeah, perfect. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the underwater archaeology does here at Naval History and Heritage Command. So what we do is we preserve and tell the story of Navy's history through research, conserving, and managing its sunken military craft. We have about 14,000 aircraft wrecks and about 3,500 shipwrecks, national and international. And our main functions here is working with the sunken and terrestrial military craft management, archaeological research, conservation, curation, and then public outreach, which are helping us out today. A little bit about our sunken military craft initiative. We here, the main thing is they have historical and cultural value. A lot of these ships are considered maritime graves. Navy stance is that's the final resting place for many of the sailors and crewmen. A lot of it is environmental concerns as well, especially when you get into the 20th century where you have oil, gas, leaks, so forth. Public safety hazard as well. We have unexploded ordnance that can arise when diving on these wrecks. Sensitive material, still some of these are still contain sensitive material, and also not only do we protect the U.S. Navy wrecks, we also help protect foreign craft that are in our waters as well. So within that scope, we understand also that a lot of these wrecks are protected under the Sunken Military Craft Act, which was initiated in 2004. And then we also implemented a permitting process, which enforces the program to foster responsibility and research on these crafts by external parties, because we understand that sometimes there's going to have to be disturbances. And so this is just to make sure that the process is, when it is disturbed, that it's done archaeologically and in a responsible manner. The next thing we have is archaeological research. This is sort of what everybody thinks, archaeology is. They don't see the other parts of it. So this is where they go out and survey, we go out in the field, we investigate some of the sunken military craft that's under our purview. And the main thing that it supports is our inventory, our survey documentation, helping to assess some of these wrecks that may have issues that we don't know about just yet. So we have to go out and make sure that they are still in good condition from year to year. We also support larger projects and support and management responsibilities. And a lot of this is also it's good archaeological and historical work because it can address stories and people and events from different angles that sometimes the historical documentation cannot show. And that's also why archaeology is important for understanding that. And then a lot of our projects stem from unanticipated discoveries or external collaborations. As you can see, we have a few things that we do that we actually do go out and partnership with other people out in the field and help with the research and permitting. The next thing is, of course, conservation and collection management that we do. We are responsible for all the artifacts that come up from the Central Military Craft. Right now we have around about 30,000 in our curation spaces and around 50 to 100 depending on what's going on actively in conservation. We have about 8,000 on loan. We have a loan permitting program that helps. One of our things that we like to do is once they come into our lab, we stabilize them and we know they're ready to go. We like to get them back out to the public, and this is where we have our permitting program. And right now we have about 17 institutions that have loans out for us, both national and international. And then public outreach and education. This is important to get the word out about the Second Military Craft Act, what Navy is doing to help protect these sites, and also tell that story about the U.S. Navy history. We do publications. We have one out about the recovery operations of Hunley. We also give tours, we do presentations. Also, we have a very robust internship program, which is paramount in doing some of our research. So on that note, I'm going to now start in on one second military craft that's under our purview, and that's the USS MACON. So the U.S. Navy Akron class airships started between World War I and World War II. The U.S. Navy began the lighter-than-air program with airships. Many of these were used to serve as a early warning defense on both sides of the U.S. coast at the time. A lot of them went out for scouting and just doing certain missions within that area. Airships, dirigibles, zeppelins, and blimps are aircraft that inflate with gas that is lighter. The U.S. Navy Akron class is actually considered a rigid airship, which does have a structural frame made out of aluminum. And then one thing that was quite interesting is that it was the first flying aircraft carrier fleet with the ability to carry at least 5 biplanes during that time. And also they were considered still ships, so you also had living quarters, you had controls, and so it maintained just like a ship. So the USS MACON, it was constructed at the beginning in 1931 at the Goodyear Zeppelin factory in Ohio, and it finished in March 1933. You can see these great photos from our Navy archives showing some of the buildings. You can see some of that structural pieces coming together, and then as it's continuing, you can also see the cotton cloth that is actually coated with a gelatin lax coating. It's about 750 feet with nearly 850,000 cubic meter capacity for helium. It's quite a bit of helium going on there. Some brave men during that time. Just wanted to show some more photos. Sometimes photos tell more about the story than just talking about it. As you can see, during the 1933 and 1935, it went on various scouting missions. You can see just the size of it. This right here in the top right is actually getting ready for its maiden voyage. Down at the bottom, I love this one because in the background it's New York City. And then a little bit of inside the structure. You can see the control panels and the men working in sort of the close confines that they have to work in during that time. Also pay attention to the bottom right because that actually correlates to the structural piece that we have on display here today. I should note that that's not actually where the structural piece came from. It's just a representation of what it looks like. Just clarification. One of the things that it was known, again, it was an aircraft carrier at the time, so it actually it can hold up to five biplanes. These were Curtiss F9C-2 Sparrowhawks. These were chosen because they were very light. They were made of aluminum and it covered in a doped type of fabric. They were also, one of the interesting things that they were used to maneuver around these airships and able to attach via a trapeze system. These pilots became known as men on the flying trapeze, so they were very daring pilots during that time. The next image to show you is there is one at the National Air and Space Museum. As you can see, photos from that, and please note the colors on the actual ones, and because that will be relevant later on. But the other thing I'd like to point is down here at the bottom right. This is one of those daring pilots. You can see sort of the trapeze system, and the actual planes would have this extension and have a hook. And there is a YouTube video out that actually shows video of the pilot trying to hook onto them. They fly up right until they get close to that hook, and then they have to shut their engines off to hook into that. So that's where the daring comes in with their names. But it seemed like it worked very well for that time period and for the USS MACON. Unfortunately, February 12, 1935, the USS MACON was returning from a multi-day exercise when a storm near Point Sur, California started causing extremely high gust wind, tearing away its upper tail fan, and it began losing gas. The crew started jettisoning gear, ballast, causing it to rise, but that caused even more problems. This led the MACON, along with the 4 Sparrowhawks, to begin sinking down into the ocean floor. A Mayday call was made during that time, and crew were rescued. All but 2 Navy crewmen survived. So this is actually considered a maritime grave site. And that's that photo is just another photo representing. You can see how big it is, but you can barely see it. But there's 2 Sparrowhawks flying underneath there. It's put it to scale for sure how big it was. So moving forward to actually discovery of the wreck. Discovery of the wreck occurred about half a century later when a fisherman found a piece of the wreck in the net. And this began a search for it, and once it was found, beginning in the 1990s, a Naval History Heritage Command, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, Matagorda Bay, National Marine Sanctuary began a joint organizational project to conduct archaeological surveys at this site. I would like to say that these names have changed. These are the new names. Back in the 90s, they had different names, but in the end, they ended up the same organization. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the site expedition that happened in 2015, but there have been multiple surveys happened before, and also photos of the site. So over the 1990s all the way up until the 2015, we actually have a photo record of what it looks like over time. So it was very interesting to review those. Also in 2015, the USS MACON wreck was placed on the National Register of Historical Places as well. So in the summer of 2015, another joint organizational archaeological survey was conducted along with Ocean Exploration Trust. The survey provided archaeologists more in-depth knowledge of the potential longevity of aviation sites in deep water environments. That was one of the questions that was posed of like this particular wreck site is 1,500 feet below. So that was one of the questions, is like, how is the preservation? What does it look like now and through over time? And so it gives us an idea of wrecks, how they respond that deep in the water, especially ones with aluminum. The main goal was to create map photo mosaic. On-site photography and video happened. 3D modeling, that actually didn't go as well as it was planned. Small object recovery, and then they actually did some soil and water sampling testing as well. So, using ROV remote operation vehicles, Hercules and Argus, which I love the names, they made a photo mosaic along with video and photos, as well as getting samples and bringing up a particular piece of the structure in a 16-hour survey. And it was conducted by NOAA and OET in summer of 2015. Now, one thing that's quite interesting, if you look down at the bottom, you see a photo mosaic that was done. The wreck, unfortunately, is, there's one part of the wreck, and then there's 250-meter area devoid of a visible wreck. And then you go to the next side and you actually see more of the wreck. So the left image is Field A, which is 60-meter diameter, includes the aft portion, hangar, and the forward biplanes. Then the right image is Field B, where you have it's 60 by 50 meters, including the forward and bow of the USS MACON. So I wanted to get a little bit closer view of Field B, and this is one thing that's quite interesting. The preservation they have found is quite remarkable. A lot of it's because it's dark. It's 1,500 feet down. It's cold. It was buried very deeply. So you have a lot of factors that help with the preservation. But you can also see the little striations on the Field B, and you can see the bow of the MACON. So when it laid down, it actually made that impression. So that was a really interesting find to see through the photo mosaic. This is sort of going back to that photo we saw a couple of slides ago, which is referred to, these are some of the Curtiss F9C-2 Sparrowhawks that were found. You can see some of the photos. As archaeologists, that's great visibility. Sometimes you can only go by feel, so these are good photos. Now, if you note, you can see some of the wing sections. So if you look at the right photo, if you look at the top right, you can see some of the yellow and the yellow down at the bottom. So the correlation is remarkable, and the paint on a lot of that fabric is still intact, which is quite remarkable due to the environmental factors within the wreck site. Have a few more photos from the wreck site. Unfortunately, I don't know which angle this top one was done, but you can see that what the wreck site looks like. It's not, it went down perfectly. There was no disturbance. There was a, it goes down and things are strode in different places. But the two bottom ones are of interest because I wanted to show how the structural piece was actually handled. Of course, 1,500 feet, divers can't go down, so the OET staff was able to use the Hercules ROV and extract a piece of the wreckage. Reason we decided to get a piece was for more research and study on how the aluminum is handling down there. see at the corrosion and what it was doing. So this piece was brought up. So with that piece, what was brought up, it was kept wet. Usually it's best if artifacts are removed from a wet environment, it needs to stay in a wet environment until it can be properly handled by archaeological conservators. It was brought here to our lab, and it was worked on throughout a period of about 2 years. And one of the things that we found out that this piece was made of duraluminum. This is actually, it's a aluminum, copper, magnesium, manganese alloy, apologies. Which was quite an interesting thing. As a conservator, especially in archaeological collections, we are beginning to see more and more of the aluminum coming in. So this was a good time for us to see and work with aluminum and see how it reacts. We started off, with desalination. This is paramount in moving forward in conservation. So we have to desalinate that removing salts, and it's very slow going. Give you a little bit of a context on that. We have, I guess, a cannon. If a cannon came up from a saltwater environment, it can take to 2 to 5 years just for it to desalinate, of getting the salts removed out before we can even move forward in the next stage of conservation. So, of course, this is not canon, but I'm just giving you sort of an idea of it does take a time. During that time, though, we can continue cleaning and removing some of the concretion and corrosion, like you see on the top. And then, as we do that, we were doing surface cleaning. We did find out very quickly that aluminum likes a neutral pH. It can be very finicky. If it changes one way or the other, it will react. So we have to keep a close eye on that. Afterwards, we did controlled drying. We put a corrosion inhibitor to help with the corrosion as well as environment, and we put a protective wax. This actually was a good piece to study. It actually helped us to see the effects of the underwater environment on its preservation. The understanding the preservation of small components like this particular frame also helps us understand the decay process and areas of stress and structural stability on the entire MACON site. So it really gave us some insight on what's going on down there, because we do see some corrosion pitting and so forth, but overall it's a pretty remarkable piece. So in conclusion, this was a very unique period during the Navy's aviation history. And through archaeological research, study, mapping, and testing, NHAC, Underwater Archaeology Branch, can continue telling the story about the USS MACON and the crew that actually was part of this interesting time in Navy's history. Thank you for your time. It's a little quicker than I thought. But any questions? Yes?
What type of reactions did you get when the pH was changed?
That's a good question. The reactions were more of a coating that started on the aluminum, and it was definitely a color change coating. It was it turned purple as we were going into the lab. We're like, oh, what is this? Finding out it was just because it was a change of pH level by a degree or so. It was very minor. It was easily removed. It just likes to keep in a neutral pH, and after that one issue that happened, we made sure to keep our eye on that. But yes, thank you for that question. Yes?
Is there anything interesting that happened with the metal that you found that was different from other types of metals that you studied? from that depth?
Not that, it was an interesting aluminum, because during that time period, Navy and along with other companies were actually working on trying and experimenting with aluminum. So this is a particular interesting aluminum that they were working with. So it was sort of during that time period when you see that. You don't see that type of aluminum as much anymore. So, thank you. Yes?
What are the, in terms of recovery, I understand getting the piece to examine and study. What in terms of recovery, it just leaves me with a question, like what else might you be thinking of doing as far as recovery of parts?
Okay. Actually, at this point, it's just mapping and surveying. The only reason this particular piece came up was because we wanted to see the stability of the overall site. At this point in time, we are not moving forward with any recovery efforts.
Are there any plans, are there any plans to survey it with really high-end technology, similar to what has been done on USS Yorktown, or I mean, with proper lighting, you can really get some amazing imagery. I'm just wondering how it'd be a pretty stunning site to document. I'm just wondering what the plans would be.
Oh, I agree. It would be interesting to do a little bit longer survey of that, but as far as I know, that has not been discussed at this time. But that is a good question. Yes?
Do you know what part of the ship that fragment came from? Was that part of the bow?
Actually, we don't actually know. I was trying to look that up and I could not find. It was during that time. I know it came from field area A, so it was more in the aft area. But exactly where in the aft area, I can't really pinpoint. That was a good question. Yes?
Can you extrapolate anything based on the condition of this piece as to how long the wreck may last? You know, is it something that conditions are going to wear it away, or do you think it will remain for a long time?
That's a good question. So I was doing a little bit of study on that, and with the conditions over time, looking from the 1990s, it's in pretty good condition. The only thing that is sort of weighing is the currents that are occurring. So you have exposures of the sediment in and out. So parts of the area may be more exposed at one time than the other. But from this piece, after conserving it, it seems to be in very stable condition, and it looks like it would, because of the environmental conditions, it looks like it would be well preserved. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Is the desalination process, is that the kind of thing you guys are doing over in the lab across the street? Is that what like those big tanks are for?
Yes, yeah. So you walk in and see these big tanks. Yeah, that's what it is. So there's a lot of stuff that comes in our labs. We make sure that it stays wet, and we start the desalination process right then, and we start monitoring it. Each time we do about a solution testing every month, and we test the water, and we actually see increase in chloride salts. And then once it actually stabilizes a little bit, gets to a point where it's not going to get any more salt out, we change out the water. And then slowly we see a decrease over time. And it depends on where the artifact was found. Fresh water, we still do desalination, but it doesn't take as long as artifacts from saltwater environment.
So you would take like the first water it would go into would be closer to like an ocean level.
Salt. Yes, that's correct. It would either go. Sometimes people do salt. Will have salt water, have tap water, and then move down. We tend to do more when it comes to us do more of tap water and then to deionized water, which is, it just pulls out more of those purities, so we can get a better reading with chlorides. Yes?
With other wreck sites at this depth, or have you seen other wrecks at this depth that you've pulled anything up, or any other items within this depth range? Would that be a cause for it to last longer, do you think? Or would it be more detrimental to be higher up in the chain?
Are you referring to like the...
Because the depth has the least amount of light at it,
Yes.
and there's a
yeah.
lot more salinity at certain depths. I was just curious if that
Oh,
had
yeah.
anything to do with it.
That does play a factor for sure. It really depends on, each site is so different. You can't really just, pigeonhole, oh, this one's going to do this because of these factors. But overall, if you have less light, if it's covered quickly, that helps with the oxidation, and the salinity does play a part, and depending on what the material is too. Also, it can also depend on some other issues of bacteria forming, other ocean factors that come in that can attack some of the materials that you don't really see until after it's recovered. You had a question, sir?
I do. So I'm not really sure what the depth of the Running Bay site for the Akron is like, but I do know that the wreckage there is extremely scattered because it was torn apart during its crash. It's also fairly flat, like what you saw in your pictures, the surviving wreckage. So the question is, has there been any thought about going to examine that site as well? There were a lot of loss to life there.
As far as I know, we haven't been moved forward in that direction. Surveying, I guess, again, these are protected sites, so in situ preservation is the best, but if there is a time where we're able to do that, survey would be the best thing. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, the Navy had another airship, and I was just curious, whatever happened to it? It didn't crash, did it?
And are you talking about the Akron?
I believe so,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it did. It did, again, in a storm. So, again, this program was very short-lived due to just its vulnerability. But yeah, and there was a higher loss of life on that particular one.
But everybody,
Yeah, I think there was
except for 4 or 5 people.
yeah, I believe you're right.
A lot of visitors went there too.
Hey, we're obviously doing this as a part of our exhibit in collaboration with NOAA. Have you yourself gone out on any expeditions with NOAA or things that are in the marine sanctuaries that they manage? I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that collaboration and relationship with the Navy.
Oh yeah, well, I personally have not gone out. I think this would have been really interesting, but we are always in collaboration with NOAA and other partnerships because with this particular one, it's within their sanctuary, but also dealing with some military craft, we're always in collaboration and talking and partnerships all the time. So it's an ongoing partnership. It's been very beneficial for both.
Follow up on that question.
Yeah.
So there's, of course, numbers of efforts underway in the last few years, private enterprises, surveying ships and so on. But there's also, of course, lots of efforts to locate aircraft. And of course, interest over the years trying to bring things up and salvage them and restore them and put them in museums. So, how much of that do you get involved in terms of oversight?
With the oversight, with any sunken military craft, that would be under our purview. We are involved quite a bit on that. this salvaging, we refer to those as unauthorized disturbances. So we deal accordingly with those particular ones, and we hope that with that it will bring more insight that in situ preservation is better for the overall artifact.
A place like the National Naval Aviation Museum, I know they would love to be able to fill out some of their collection with things that they don't have.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how much collaboration do you have to have with them on things so that they don't go, like, for example, I'm sure they'd love to get one of these sparrowhawks, or at least parts of it. They have raised their F3F from off the coast of California. That aircraft was brought up, like 20 or 30 years, 25 years ago, so. And it's now on their museum floor. Just wondering, it must be challenging to try to keep up with all of the interest out there. I mean, all the things from employers at the Great Lakes, no, not Great Lakes, but all of the training carriers.
Lake Michigan.
Lake Michigan. Yeah, there must be a lot of that. So I'm just really kind of wondering, what relationships do you guys have with the museum in Pensacola as far as authorizing things, or can you talk about? I don't know.
We do have a relationship with that. We do talk. The stance for Navy Undersecond Military Craft is keep things in situ. It's good for the artifact as well. We do have a permitting process that is allowed, but it has to be told, and we have to review it as well. I think if that's what you're referring to, is more of that. I think one of my colleagues may have a better. She keeps raising her hand, so I'm like, hey.
Sure. All right.
Yeah.
But if it's an internal NHHC decision to recover claims, it's discussed between maybe the director has the
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But there are certain archaeological standards that need to be met as part of the project, and you have to make sure there's funding in place to properly conserve the aircraft when it comes up. And so those things all need to be done before the project even starts, so that can take a long time. But so there's have to be a good reason to collect that claim. There has to be a good candidate for recovery based on the safety of the people viewing it and the accessibility of the aircraft and its condition, its historical relevance, and then it has to be documented. The recovery has to be documented archaeologically and not just grabbed by a.
So the whole process could take, a decade or more, probably.
It takes a lot of planning.
It does,
And the
conservation takes some time.
Yeah.
So that's
And
the
especially,
the whole net balance of the process has to be ironed out ahead of time.
yeah.
I see evidence of that not happening here. So just whether I handle that. I don't know.
Well, a lot of the things that were done earlier, like Michigan, for instance, were done before the military craft act passed, and those were done through, a lot of them were done through the museum in Pensacola. And now that things are under the military craft act, slow down a little bit.
So there's better oversight.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather, for answering that. I was a little confused on that and how we wanted to have that answer. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Shanna.
thank you. And please come up and view the artifact if you want. Just view it from a distance.